going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and today I want to talk about Captain America. I want to talk about all of Rick Remender's run on Captain America, as well as the first two volumes of Nick Spencer's Sam Wilson series. And I thought about talking about some of these books on the 365-day graphic novel review challenge that I did last year, but I had already talked about the first volume of Remender's run, and I think maybe the second volume also, and so I didn't want to just jump into volume 3 since I'd already done videos on volumes 1 and 2. So I decided to save all of this, and I reread all of this, or reread what I had already read, and then read what I had not read, over the span of about 3 days. Pretty much spent all of my free time reading Captain America comics earlier this week, and so I wanted to go ahead and talk about all these Captain America books in one video. And that includes all of Rick Remender's run, which is like 6 or 7 volumes, and then 2 volumes of what Nick Spencer has done. And I want to go ahead and say huge spoilers for pretty much everything here. This includes the first 2 volumes of Remender's run, which is Castaway in Dimension Z, Book 1 and Book 2, and then Loose Nuke is Volume 3, and then The Iron Nail, and then Tomorrow Soldier, and then that is about 25 issues, and then that series ended, and then we had Fear Him, which was a miniseries co-written with Dennis Hopeless, and then we had a 6-issue, I guess, ongoing series that ended after 6 issues. They did the same thing with Remender's Uncanny Avengers run, where that run lasted about 5 volumes, and then they ended it right around the time of Axis, and then they did another 6-issue series, and then ended that one, and then they did a brand new ongoing starting over with issue 1. Kind of did sort of a similar thing here with Captain America, where after the Fear Him miniseries, we had Hydra Ascendant. That was volume 1 of a new series, and then that ended, and then we had Secret Wars, and then that had a tie-in called Hail Hydra, which was the end of Remender's run. And then after that, we have the first 2 volumes of Nick Spencer's Sam Wilson run, where Sam Wilson is still Captain America, and the first one was called Not My Captain America, and the second one I think might have been called Battle for Pleasant Hill, or Fight for Pleasant Hill, or something like that. So anyway, Remender's run starts right after Ed Brubaker's run finished. And Ed Brubaker, he was on the book for a really long time, like 9 years or something like that. He was on it for quite a while. And one of the big things that I remember people kind of making a big stink about with this series, I'm just going to jump right into something that happens around the middle, towards the middle end of Remender's run. But he has Steve age till he looks like he's like 80 or 90 or so. And then he replaces Steve with Sam Wilson, the Falcon. Falcon becomes the new Captain America, and a lot of people, well, some people are just straight up racist, and they're just going to hate anything that has a black character in a prominent role in a series that formerly had a white guy as a protagonist. A lot of people are racist. I don't care if Sam Wilson's black. I like the character of Sam Wilson a lot in this run. I like him in Nick Spencer's run and in Rick Remender's run, although they both handle him very differently. The thing that kind of raised some concerns with me here is that we just had a Captain America is replaced by another Captain America story in Ed Brubaker's run. Literally, the writer that preceded Rick Remender just did this story. He did handle it a little bit differently, but Ed Brubaker, he had Captain America seemingly get assassinated, and then he is replaced by Bucky, who becomes the new Captain America. Then Rick Remender is the very next writer on the book, and then he has Steve Rogers age till he looks like he's really old, and then Sam Wilson replaces him. And then Nick Spencer comes in, and then by the tail end of, well, I guess it's about the middle of Volume 2 of Nick Spencer's Sam Wilson run. Steve is brought back down to his normal age, and then both he and Sam Wilson are both going to be Captain America, and then that segues into Steve Rogers' Captain America. So Nick Spencer, he is writing 2 Captain America books at once, and I only read the first 2 Sam Wilson books, but I do know of stuff that was going on later on in Spencer's run, so spoilers for some of Spencer's later stuff, but you probably heard about it on the internet if you were ever on the internet in the last 2 years. But Steve Rogers, it turns out, was an agent of Hydra. And so you have 3 writers who all get rid of Steve Rogers in some way, all back to back to back. This wouldn't bother me if you had someone who replaced Steve Rogers in the 1990s and brought in some other guy to be Captain America, and then like 15, 20 years later you have someone else come in and they do the same thing. That sort of thing happens in comic books all the time. Ben Reilly replaced Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Azrael replaced Batman. Artemis replaced Wonder Woman. You had 4 replacement Supermen when Superman died in the 90s. So this kind of thing happens, all right? I don't mind whenever you replace the main character with someone else, and then eventually you're going to bring back the main guy. I don't mind that, but this makes it look like all of these guys didn't have much interest in the character of Steve Rogers, and they wanted to write Captain America, but they didn't care about the main character. That would be like saying, yeah, I want to write a James Bond story, but I don't like James Bond. I want to write it about someone else. Like, I want to do a Moneypenny story, which I guess if you want to do that, that's fine, but just call it Moneypenny. Don't do a James Bond movie where you kill James Bond in the first 5 minutes, and then Moneypenny is the main character, because some people want to watch James Bond. If you want to watch a Moneypenny story, then do a Moneypenny spinoff. And I feel like that's kind of what's going on here, where it may not be true. Rick Remender may absolutely love Steve Rogers. Nick Spencer may love Steve Rogers. I doubt it. But some of these guys, they probably really like Steve Rogers, and they just felt like they had nothing to say about this character. And to that, I would say, maybe you don't need to be writing Captain America if you don't feel like you have anything to say about this character. Now, Rick Remender, he did write Steve Rogers for like 4 or 5 volumes. It was towards the end of the Tomorrow Soldier story where Sam Wilson becomes the new Captain America. So I would say it's over half of Remender's run where Steve Rogers is the main character. So with him, it's not as big of a deal, but it still is a little weird that all these guys, it seemed like they didn't have any interest in writing Steve Rogers. Now, like I said, I wasn't there. I didn't hear these guys say any of that. It just seems like that to me. But anyway, that's one of those things where I think a lot of people, they just want to make a stink no matter what. There was a lot of fuss being made over Remender's run on Captain America. At one point, it's revealed that Arnim Zola's daughter, who is a good guy at that time, she sleeps with the Falcon at one point. We don't see it happen. We're seeing the aftermath of it. And then a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, the Falcon just slept with an underage girl. And then if you actually read the comic, it's very clear that that's not the case. She even says that she had some of this wine on her 23rd birthday. So she's, at the very least, 23, probably a little bit older. But for some reason, a lot of people were trying to say, Rick Remender should be fired because the Falcon just slept with an underage girl. No, he didn't. That actually didn't happen. There was nothing even kind of like that happened. I think a lot of people, they just want to make waves even when there's nothing to make waves about. But then some of this, I can kind of see like, yeah, maybe making Captain America a Nazi in Nick Spencer's run, maybe that wasn't the best idea. But anyway, I'm not talking about that part of Nick Spencer's run. I'm talking about Remender's run and then just the first 2 volumes of Spencer's run. So starting off, we have Castaway in Dimension Z. That is the first 2 volumes of this run, where Steve Rogers is accidentally taken to an alternate reality where Arnim Zola is basically the undisputed ruler. He has all these weird-looking monsters that he's created, and he has a daughter who's maybe 10, and then a son who is just an infant, and he injects something into Steve Rogers, and then Steve is able to escape, and he kidnaps the baby, and then he is stuck in this dimension for 10 or 12 years, and he raises the baby as his own. I really love this. I love all of this volume, actually these 2 volumes together. Really love it. I love Steve as a father figure. That's something I never thought I would see in the main Marvel books. It's kind of like how Superman now is a dad in the main DC books. That's something that you would certainly see in what if stories and alternate realities where Steve maybe ages in a normal rate and then he eventually has a kid or something like that. That's something that you would expect to see in issues of What If or Elseworlds, but it's not something that I ever expected to see in the main Marvel books, and I really like this relationship that he has with Ian. And I like that Steve has doubts about what he's doing. At one point, he realizes maybe it wasn't a good idea to kidnap Arnim Zola's son. Yes, Zola is a bad guy who wants to kill all of life on planet Earth, but I shouldn't have taken his son. And then he kind of realizes, no, it's fine, I saved this boy, and I really like that. I like that Steve is also put in between a rock and a hard place throughout this run. We get to see a lot of flashbacks to whenever he was younger, during the Depression, and he was trying to keep his mom going when she was sick. His dad had already left them, and he's basically the one breadwinner of the house, and he's like 13. We get to see him do some stuff that he's not proud of, and then he realizes, no, that wasn't what I should have done. I need to atone for that, and there's always a way that I can do this without falling down and becoming like the bad guys. And I really like that we get to see him in some pretty dark situations, but he doesn't succumb to those situations, even when things get pretty dark. And like I said, spoilers for this entire run, but Sharon Carter is seemingly killed, and she is Steve Rogers' almost fiance. She proposed to him, and I guess he was kind of him-hawing, not really sure if he wanted to be married and wanted to settle down, but then she dies, and seemingly his son dies, and it's a 1-2 punch for Captain America. He goes back to the real world after he's convinced Arnim Zola's daughter, Jet, that she doesn't need to be allied with Zola, that working with him is wrong. They go back to the real world, and then their portal to Dimension Z is cut off, and Steve is once again a man out of time. He feels like he doesn't belong in the real world because he just spent 12 years years in this weird alternate reality with monsters trying to kill him and other monsters who had given him a home. He felt like he had a home there, even though it was a pretty rough life, but he had a son there, and then he lost his son, and now he feels like he doesn't belong in the world that like 5 minutes has passed in the main Marvel Universe. And everyone talks about how even though he spent 12 years in Dimension Z, he has not aged any, and that's an unexpected side effect of the Super Soldier Serum. And Rick Remender, at the end of Volume 1, there's like a little afterword that was printed in one of the letters pages, and he talks about how Captain America does not actually have any superpowers, and his superpower is that he will never give up, and he will always stay standing. That's a big part of this run, where he talks about how his mom told him to just keep standing up. And Rick Remender says he doesn't actually have any powers. I would like to argue with him a little bit on that. That was a big thing in Stan Lee's run in the 60s when Captain America was featured in Tales of Suspense. They would always talk about how Captain America does not have any powers, and that's not really true. Captain America was a 90-pound weakling. A strong wind would have blown him over, and then they gave him a super soldier serum that turned him into Mr. Universe. He has powers. Now, he may not be as powerful as Thor or the Hulk or even someone like Beast, but he does have powers. So this idea that people have that he doesn't have any abilities, I think that's a little weird, but anyway, I'm willing to ignore that. But clearly here in Remender's run, even though Remender is the one who's saying that Steve doesn't have any powers, we're now seeing that he's seemingly immortal and that he can never age. At least for now, he can't age. So anyway, that's another thing that's going to kind of make him feel even more out of place in this world. Once he has this notion that all of his friends that he has are going to grow old and die, and he's maybe going to stay the same age forever. So that's stuff that's kind of making him feel down in the dumps, and he's kind of having to recover from that, and he's not really able to do it. One thing I noticed about Rick Remender's run on this title, it kind of reminds me of his Uncanny X-Force title, where stuff would happen to the characters, like really bad stuff you never would have thought they would go there. Stuff happens, and then he just keeps kicking them while they're down, and then more bad stuff happens. Stuff comes from out of nowhere, where it's like, ooh, that's going to be really bad for these characters. Some of the stuff that happens here kind of gets brought up like it's a really big deal, and then they kind of push it to the side and ignore it and then forget about it. At one point, Nuke, he is kind of the bad guy of Volume 3. I'll go ahead and talk about Volume 3 and Volume 4 together because it really is kind of one larger story. But Volume 3, Nuke is being manipulated by this guy called the Iron Nail, and he was an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. back in the 60s. He was Asian, and he was sent to infiltrate communist China and kind of see what was going on. And then while he was there, he basically said, I kind of like the communist ideals, and so he became kind of a communist, but he wasn't necessarily allied with Chairman Mao or any of the communist Chinese. But he was allied with their ideals, but he kind of had his own thing going on, and so he somehow becomes an actual dragon person. He awakens this mystical dragon that gives him part of its essence, and then he is somehow able to get into Nuke's head and send Nuke to someplace in Russia, and Nuke is talking about how this was where America seemingly lost the war, and then he says, we didn't lose, we just put the war on hold, and then he starts committing atrocities over there. So even though Captain America is needing some time to kind of recover emotionally from all the stuff that happened in Dimension Z, they send him over so that he can quietly dispatch Nuke, not Duke. Duke is a G.I. Joe character. They want to quietly dispatch Nuke so that people don't see this guy with an American flag painted on his face, killing innocent people in Russia, and then blaming the American government. But there's this photographer over there, and she's taking pictures of all this stuff going on, and then Captain America at one point, he's almost able to calm Nuke down and say, hey, maybe you can come in for questioning, we can sort this out, we can figure out who's giving you these orders. He's trying to tell him, like, this is not the way that you should be acting, this is not the way I should be acting, and Nuke is very much a xenophobe. He's talking about how immigrants are awful and they are the death of this country, and then Captain America says, hey, my parents were immigrants, if they weren't here, then I wouldn't be here. And Nuke is kind of starting to question what he's believing and what he's being fed by the Iron Nail, the ex-S.H.I.E.L.D. guy. And then this photographer, she takes a picture as Captain America is grabbing Nuke's hand and lifting him up off the ground. It looks like they're shaking hands. She takes a picture, and then Nuke starts to panic again, and then there has to be more fighting. Falcon goes after the reporter, and then he says, hey, I'm going to need that picture. S.H.I.E.L.D. orders. And she's basically like, oh, okay, so it's okay to have freedom of the press until you guys want there to not be freedom of the press. And Falcon is basically like, okay, you can go. And then she publishes this story that Captain America and Nuke were over there killing people, and of course that wasn't what was happening. And I feel like S.H.I.E.L.D. should should have at the very least gotten this girl and said, hey, you know that didn't really happen, right? And she knows that didn't happen because Captain America was there trying to calm him down, and she saw that, she takes a picture of it, and then she goes and prints an entirely different story. But anyway, that's something that a lot of the media kind of latches onto, and they're saying, like, Steve Rogers should be held accountable for this. This is a really bad thing that he was involved with. And then they just kind of ignore that subplot by the middle of Volume 5, they kind of just completely ignore that. Volume 5 was the Tomorrow Soldier. I don't think that they bring that subplot up again after that. But that was one of those things, and there's a couple of other things later on in Remender's run. I could just make a list of subplots that he introduced and then were never carried over into Nick Spencer's run, which makes me wonder if Remender did everything that he wanted to do on Captain America because there were so many ideas that he introduced and then didn't follow through with them. So it makes me wonder if he did everything he wanted to do, and if he did, maybe he just said, hey, Nick, these are some of the things that I didn't get to finish up doing, or I thought maybe you would want to play with these ideas, and then Nick Spencer says, that's okay, thanks, I'm going to do my own thing. And that's okay, he's not obligated to follow up on these subplots, but that does not change the fact that these subplots were left hanging. There's another one, I'll talk about that later, but anyway, after Nuke is captured, then the Iron Nail is able to detonate Nuke. He is a literal nuke, and he kills a whole bunch of people on the helicarrier that he was on, and then the Iron Nail, he is able to release this guy named Mr. Mind Bubble, and he was a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent as well. He created himself as kind of a humane assassin. He basically said, anytime we go and kill these people, we need to do it in a humane way. We need to make them feel love and comfort as they die. And so he has these bubbles that will surround you, and then basically put you in your own little matrix, or kind of like the Black Mercy plant from DC Comics, where you get your heart's desire and then you eventually die while you're happy in your own little world. And he was created to be kind of the opposite number of the various super soldiers from the Weapon Plus program. And if you've read Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men, or even some of Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force run, the Weapon Plus program is this huge umbrella organization that created Wolverine, created Nuke, created Captain America, the Stepford Cuckoos, Phantom X, created all those characters, and basically Mr. Mind Bubble, he felt like these guys were possibly too powerful, and they needed to have an opposite number in case any of these guys go out of check. And that doesn't really work because he's put into suspended animation, and then he is awakened by the Iron Nail. I cannot remember his name. It's like Ron Shin or Ran Shan or something like that, because at one point they call him like Ron Shin, and then in the very next time they mention his name, they spell it a little bit differently. I noticed it was spelled two different ways at one point, so I cannot remember what his name was. But anyway, basically this guy wants to bring down S.H.I.E.L.D. He thinks that S.H.I.E.L.D. is corrupt, even though he used to work for them. He basically believes that S.H.I.E.L.D., they don't have any oversight, and a lot of people talk about that. The reporter woman, after she releases that story, a lot of people are saying, hey, S.H.I.E.L.D. is just going and doing whatever they want in this country over here. They don't have any oversight at all. Later on in, I want to say Nick Spencer's run, we do see that there is the World Security Council, kind of like what we had in the movies. And I don't know if that was a thing in the comics before the first Avengers movie, but they kind of are like oversight over the director. But then we see, as we saw in the movie, that sometimes the director can just say, I don't want to listen to you guys. But anyway, hold on one second. Okay, so anyway, the Iron Nail, he basically is able to get this super secret helicarrier thing that can turn into a giant robot thing, kind of like a Mobile Suit Gundam or whatever, and he sends it back over to the country where Nuke was killing people, and he wants to frame S.H.I.E.L.D. for going over and destroying that country so that S.H.I.E.L.D. will be brought down by the United States, and they can say, hey, we don't want S.H.I.E.L.D. anymore since obviously they're crazy and out of control. Captain America is able to stop him, but as we saw in the Loose Nuke storyline in a flashback, the Iron Nail is able to we saw in the flashback he was able to temporarily steal the youth of Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan. He makes them both old men temporarily, but then like 2 panels later, they're back to being their young selves. And I know that Nick Fury is young for a different reason than Captain America is. He has this thing called the Infinity Formula, and I guess Dum Dum Dugan does also. So maybe he wasn't able to negate the effects of the Infinity Formula like he was able to negate the effects of the Super Soldier formula with Steve, because he turns Steve into an old man, and that's what happens. That's what leads to Sam Wilson becoming the new Captain America. And for some reason, it's permanent with Steve. It wasn't permanent with Nick Fury. I don't know why. But anyway, Ron Shin is defeated, and then Volume 5, we kind of start with a new volume. new storyline that's more connected to Castaway in Dimension Z Book 1 and 2, where Arnim Zola, he comes back to Earth with a big army of the monsters that he had in Dimension Z, and of course, Steve Rogers is no longer Captain America, and he is kind of still recovering emotionally from all the stuff that he's been going through during this run, but you've got Jet, like I said earlier, she is kind of sort of an item with Falcon, and then they're trying to stop this invasion, and then we find out that Sharon Carter is still alive, that Arnim Zola kept her alive after she seemingly died, and then she escaped, and we found out at the end of Volume 2 of the Dimension Z storyline that although Steve thought that his son was dead, it turned out he was actually still alive, and Sharon Carter actually helped raise him after Steve went back to Earth, and he comes back to Earth to try and warn Steve and the Avengers that Arnim Zola and his army is coming, and now he's about the same age that Steve was before he was de-aged. I guess he might be a little younger. Steve might be, I don't know, in his early 30s before he's de-aged, whereas Ian, he might be in his early 20s. Ian is Steve's son, by the way. He might be in his early 20s whenever he comes back to Earth. But anyway, so now you've got Steve Rogers, who's an old man, Sharon Carter, she's alive, Falcon and Jet and Ian, they're all on the same side. Yay, it's going to be a happy ending for Steve. Nope. After these guys are all able to jointly defeat Arnim Zola and push back his invasion, then Sharon Carter accuses Jet of being a spy who is still working for Arnim Zola. And then you would think that everybody would be kind of standing on her side, except that Ian doesn't trust her. Steve seemingly trusts her, but he says, even though I don't believe that you are a spy, I'm going to have to take you in. We're going to have to arrest you so that we can sort all this out. And Jet, she still doesn't really understand how this world works. She still thinks a lot of the world, the way the world works is kind of stupid and needs to be changed. And so she basically says, okay, screw you guys. I'm going to go back and work with my father, who was telling me that you guys couldn't be trusted. Now here you are. You say that I can't be trusted. Well, I'm going to leave. And so she goes back to work with her father, which is kind of sad because I was wanting to see this character slowly form into a heroic ally of these characters, and maybe like someday we would see her join the Avengers. Unfortunately, that does not happen. And also, unfortunately, we don't get to see her come back as a villain. I would have thought that would have been a no-brainer once Sam Wilson was Captain America. Bring her back as a villain for Sam Wilson, because these two had a bond. They slept with each other. Bring her back and have her fight Sam Wilson a couple times. But once again, I have a feeling that Nick Spencer had entirely different ideas of what he wanted to do with Captain America than what Rick Remender was doing. It almost feels like he really wasn't that interested in following up with any of the stuff that Remender was doing, which is a shame, because I think that Jet could have made an interesting ally or an interesting villain with the way they left things here in the Tomorrow Soldier storyline. But then the end of the Tomorrow Soldier, Steve, he says, okay guys, I'm calling all the Avengers, active and inactive, together to basically say that Sam Wilson is the new Captain America. Yay, it's a good happy moment. And then the Tomorrow Soldier ends with a whole bunch of people in cloaks and hoods. We don't know who any of them are. They are the Unknown Council of Hydra. And apparently one of these guys is actually an Avenger who is spying on the Avengers. We never find out who this is. Now later on, spoilers again for all of the stuff that I'm talking about, later on in Nick Spencer's run on Captain America, that's after the stuff that I read, we find out that Steve is an agent of Hydra, but that was brainwashing through a cosmic cube thing that is part of Nick Spencer's run. It has nothing to do with what's going on here. So we don't know who the agent of Hydra is who is also an Avenger. I'm 100% certain that it is not Steve Rogers, because at one point they mentioned Steve Rogers. They're talking about like Steve has made Sam Wilson this new Captain America. So we know it's not Sam Wilson. We know it's not Steve Rogers. It could be anyone else. And that's never followed up on either. As far as I know, we never get to see who the members of the Unknown Council are. I don't know if they've been retconned out of existence. I haven't read Secret Wars. Secret Wars happened right after the Hydra Ascendant storyline, which was the next one after Tomorrow Soldier. And as far as I know, Secret Wars kind of sort of did a soft reboot of the Marvel Universe, where like 99% of what came before Secret Wars is still continuous with everything that's happening now. It's all still in canon, except for like 1% of stuff. A friend of mine was saying that apparently now Jessica Jones and Luke Cage don't know that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, and they did know before. I don't know. I haven't read a lot of modern Daredevil, so I don't know. But this is another thing that I'm wondering if some of these plot points from Rick Remender's run were gently rebooted away after the events of Secret Wars. And that's possible, and that may be Nick Spencer's way of saying, I don't really want to deal with any of that stuff. I want to do my own thing. But anyway, here we find out that maybe there is an Avenger who's an agent of Hydra. Maybe that's going to be dealt with some point in the future. I doubt it, because in Nick Spencer's run on Captain America, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but in that run, we find out that Captain America has reluctantly worked with S.H.I.E.L.D., and they have taken down Hydra completely. So I doubt that we're ever going to get a follow-up to the Unknown Council, and we're going to find out who any of them are, which is a shame because I kind of would have liked to have known. But anyway, after the Tomorrow Soldier, that series ends, and then we get Hydra Ascendant, and that is a story where Sam works with Misty Knight, and she tells Sam Wilson that Hydra has an agent inside pretty much every superhero team. She mentions the Inhumans, the Avengers, and the X-Men. I don't know if she mentioned the Fantastic Four, but that would be assumed if she says every superhero team. And so, again, that's another subplot that's not followed up later on. And then at the end of that storyline, after Sam works with Misty, this new Hydra run by Baron Zemo, it's like Baron Zemo, the Armadillo, the Bloody Baron, or that vampire guy, I can't remember his name. There's a few others, Red Skull's daughter. They all have kind of formed a new branch of Hydra. They're off doing their own thing. Basically, it's just Captain America's best villains who are all still alive working together. They really don't have that much in common with the actual Hydra. But anyway, they have an Inhuman boy whose blood is going to make everyone on the planet sterile. And so Captain America, Sam Wilson, he has to stop this, and then he works with Misty Knight, and she refuses to let him call him back up because, as she said, all the superhero teams have a Hydra agent, so we don't know who we can trust. And by the end of this story, they're able to stop the new Hydra from doing this thing, and then Misty, she has the boy, and then Falcon, he comes back to S.H.I.E.L.D., and he's kind of yelling at Nick Fury's son, Nick Fury Jr., I guess is his name, and he looks like Samuel L. Jackson, so I'll just call him Samuel L. here. But anyway, he's yelling at him, saying, like, this is kind of your fault. All this happened on your watch. And then he says, in any case, did Misty Knight bring the boy back? She's an agent working for you guys. And Nick Fury Jr., Samuel L. says, no, Misty Knight isn't an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And that's how we end Hydra Ascendant. So I'm assuming that maybe this version of Misty Knight was an agent of Hydra, and even though she helped Sam, she had her own agenda and she was doing her own thing. We don't know what happens here. If you go to Wikipedia, I actually did this, if you go to Wikipedia and look at Misty Knight's recent history, it completely skips over the storyline. It talks about what she was doing in the Nick Spencer run, where she's still an ally of Sam, but we don't get to see any reference to her telling him that there are Hydra agents everywhere, and we don't get to see any reference of what happened when she didn't bring this Inhuman guy whose blood is very dangerous to the entire planet, when she didn't bring him back to S.H.I.E.L.D. You would think whenever Samuel L. tells Sam that Misty is not an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Sam would say, she told me that she was. Maybe we need to find her because something's not adding up, and she has this very dangerous kid who's still out there and still alive. Nope, none of that is followed up because after Hydra Ascendant, we have Secret Wars, which, like I said, I have not read, and then Rick Remender's run concludes with a 4-issue miniseries called Hail Hydra. And Ian was working with Sam trying to stop the new Hydra, and then he takes this thing called the Infinite Elevator, which basically can teleport you to anywhere on the planet, and apparently can also go to different universes. It takes him to Battleworld, and so he has memories of the 616 Marvel Universe, but then he doesn't actually know how he got here. It takes him a few issues to figure out what's going on, and unfortunately, I did not really like this storyline. Basically, the whole thing is Ian realizing that sometimes there are situations that you cannot win, and so he just leaves. The bad guys win. There is no conclusion to this story other than Ian gets in the elevator and he escapes. And we haven't seen Ian since then. Like I said, I don't think that Nick Spencer really cares about any of the stuff that Rick Remender set up. I think it would be cool if we could see Ian again now that Captain America, Steve, now that he is back to being Captain America. I'm not really sure what's going on with Sam Wilson now in the Mark Waid, Chris Samnee Captain America stuff, but I would really like to see Ian back. I'd like to see Jet back as a bad guy. Bring these characters back because they're interesting, and that's kind of the beauty of bringing in new characters in a series. You can do stuff with them instead of bringing in the Red Skull or Baron Zemo for the billionth time. But anyway, basically the Hail Hydra miniseries is just Ian realizing that this world sucks and there's nothing he can do to save it, so he just leaves. And that's kind of a downer note for this character, and it's also kind of a downer note to end the entire run on, especially since Rick Remender doesn't come back. I forgot to talk about the Fear Him miniseries, which actually comes right after the Tomorrow Soldier, before Hydra Ascendant. Basically, nothing really happens there, nothing of note. It's co-written by Dennis Hopeless, and it's okay. It's kind of weird and stupid that Ian is able to survive in Dimension Z. He was able to fight off monsters that were really powerful and really scary in Dimension Z, and then in this storyline, he gets stuck in the sewers, and the Scarecrow is a threat to him. The Scarecrow, who has, like, no fighting prowess at all, he does have a fear toxin. We're talking about the Marvel Scarecrow, but basically it's fear toxin. He does have this fear toxin, and he talks about how Ian has never known fear before, so it's going to be really juicy whenever he can make him know fear. Why has Ian never known fear before? Just because he grew up in Dimension Z doesn't mean that he's never known fear. He would have known a very different kind of fear than what we know here on planet Earth. People like my age, we have fear of we're not going to be able to pay our bills, or we're not going to have anything whenever we retire because all that money's going to disappear, or whatever. We have those kinds of fears. Ian didn't have those fears in Dimension Z. What he had was, I'm afraid that a dragon is going to eat me today, or something really scary that Arnim Zola created. So Ian not ever knowing fear, that's really dumb. Also, suddenly being able to be defeated by the Scarecrow when he was able to make his way through Tony Stark, Thor, and the Hulk to get to his father back when they didn't know who he was, and that was a really dumb scene because he's like, I have to get to my target, and then they're like, no, and then he gets past them, and then he takes his helmet off. He's like, hey, it's me, Dad, and it seems like he could have just taken his helmet off and knocked on the door and said, hey, I'm Ian, I'm Captain America's son. But anyway, it seems really weird that he's able to go through Iron Man, Hulk, and Thor with no problem at all, and then the Scarecrow poses a problem to him. Anyway, you could kind of skip the Fear Him miniseries. That seems mean. I like Dennis Hopeless as a writer. I like Rick Remender as a writer. But you could probably skip that one. It doesn't really have any bearing on what goes on in the rest of this run. But anyway, after Rick Remender's run, you get Nick Spencer's run. And one thing I really like about Nick Spencer's run here is that not only is it a brand new guy in the costume of Captain America, but Spencer really wanted to tell different kinds of stories than he would have if Steve Rogers was Captain America. That's not something that you see a whole lot. It seems to me whenever Artemis replaces Wonder Woman, or Azrael replaces Batman, or Dick Grayson replaces Batman, you don't see different kinds of stories. When Dick is in the Batman costume, he's still punching Two-Face and the Joker. It's not like he has his own rogues gallery and his own kinds of stories when he's in the Batman costume. That's kind of what Nick Spencer's doing, and I think that's very much something that we should applaud, even if the stories are not necessarily something that I like. Nick Spencer's stories go much more political in the real world than the stories in Remender's run. Remender was going very science fiction-y. He did have political stuff going on, but it wasn't so much real-world politics. It was more S.H.I.E.L.D. is kind of corrupt, and they're kind of doing this thing that's questionable, and then even whenever it's pointed out that it is very questionable and very dangerous to everyone on the planet, S.H.I.E.L.D. is like, no, we're good, we're going to keep doing that. That's the kind of politics that we had in Rick Remender's run. Nick Spencer opens up with Sam Wilson saying, these are my political views, I am going to stand up for them, and some of it people are going to really love. Me personally, I try to stay out of politics. I don't really care about politics. A lot of times I don't want to hear other people's political views, so that was something that didn't really work for me. We still get a lot of the science fiction-y stuff here, and we get some of the same bad guys that we had in Rick Remender's run. In fact, I think one of the only subplots that Nick Spencer actually pulls from Remender's run is that Sam Wilson in the Hydra Ascendant storyline, he is able to convince the Armadillo not to work with the Hydra guys and help him stop all this going on, and then Sam says, I'm going to try and help you turn back into a human. And then in this storyline, Armadillo is once again working with some bad guys, and then he says, hey, you lied to me. And basically, Sam Wilson lied to him. Apparently, he went and called all the super smart people that he know, and nobody knows how to turn him back into a human. I find that a little bit hard to believe. There are really smart people in the Marvel Universe. You're telling me that none of them would be able to turn the Armadillo back into a human? Whatever. That's like the only subplot that Nick Spencer brings back in this run. But anyway, we get to see some callbacks to some previous runs. Specifically, at one point, Sam is turned into a werewolf, and that's a callback to Cap Wolf when Mark Gruenwald was writing the comic in the 90s. It happens in a different way here. And then we set up that Sam Wilson is going to have a new sidekick, and that's kind of cool. I like that we're getting a new Falcon. I actually did not see that coming. It's in the very last page of Volume 1, where this guy has a new Falcon outfit. It's kind of green. I think at one time Sam had a green outfit, although most of the time people know him as having a red and white outfit. But I like that Sam has his own sidekick. I think that's kind of cool, even though we already had several sidekicks that we could have been using, like Ian. Where is he? Where's Ian been up to? Anyway, I do like that we get a new sidekick here, and then in the next volume, we completely ignore this new Falcon. I'm guessing that we will see him more in some of the later volumes of this run, but in the next volume, we find out that S.H.I.E.L.D. at one point toyed with the idea of using a cosmic cube to rewrite reality to suit their needs. And that sounds very sinister because it is very sinister. And then Steve Rogers, he is like the civilian coordinator or whatever of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he basically gave an order, you are going to shut this down. And then Mariah Hill, who is a psychopath, she said, sure, I'm going to shut it down, and then she didn't. She set up this big prison called Pleasant Hill, which is basically like a big Andy Griffith town where all these supervillains have been mind-washed so that they don't know that they are supervillains, and the cosmic cube Cube has been turned into a little 4-year-old girl, and she is the one who has turned them all into normal law-abiding citizens. And Steve comes and he says, this is really immoral, you should not have done this, you disobeyed a direct order. And Mariah Hill is basically saying, nah, I can do whatever I want. She is really insufferable. I really hate Mariah Hill. Like, she is an entirely different character in the movies than she is here. I feel like if you got movie Mariah Hill and comic Mariah Hill, they would be like trying to kill each other because they are such different characters. But anyway, then it turns out that the Cosmic Cube, Kobik is what they're calling it, she didn't do that good of a job of brainwashing all these villains because a whole bunch of them were able to escape their brainwashing, and then they kind of throw a big riot in Pleasant Hill, and then Kobik is able to turn Steve back into a younger man. He still looks a little older. He's got a few wrinkles on his face, but he's not like an octogenarian like he was. But we get to see this ongoing feud between Sam and Steve in this run, and it's kind of cool getting to see that. And even though they are having an argument over something that Sam did, Steve is still saying, you know, no matter what we disagree on, Sam is still Captain America. And even when he's de-aged, he says, I don't want to take the shield back from you. I gave you this identity. It's your thing now. Even though we've been arguing, you're still Captain America. I really like that a lot. And I like that their argument here, it doesn't feel too forced. A lot of times when you have hero versus hero in something like this, like for example, X-Men Schism, or Avengers versus X-Men, or Civil War, a lot of times it feels really forced, and a lot of times one of the characters who's having an argument is written in such a way where they feel very inconsistent with how they felt before. I need to look and see how much time I got. I have plenty of time. So anyway, I really like the argument here between Sam and Steve. There is a guy, a secret guy, kind of like anonymous in real life. His name is the Whisperer, and he hacked S.H.I.E.L.D. files, and then he reveals to the public the Kobik thing that S.H.I.E.L.D. was toying with, and then he made sure that S.H.I.E.L.D. got that shut down. And Sam is saying, you know, this guy did a good thing by revealing that. And Steve is saying, yeah, but he broke the law, and he also revealed a lot of other stuff that he should not have revealed. We need to go and we need to arrest him. And then Sam basically opposes S.H.I.E.L.D. He goes and fights them and allows for the Whisperer to escape. Spoilers, we later find out the Whisperer is Rick Jones, which, you know, I don't care about Rick Jones, and clearly Sam doesn't either, so yay, Sam, you're okay in my book for that. But anyway, Rick Jones apparently, after he was no longer a Hulk-like creature called the A-Bomb, he became super smart for some reason. That seems like an afterthought that Nick Spencer threw in there. It doesn't really make sense that after he de-hulks that suddenly he would be smart. But anyway, he becomes the Whisperer, and then Steve goes and offers Rick a job at the end of this volume, and I have no idea what this job is. He just goes and says, hey, I'd like to offer you a job. So I guess he's working for S.H.I.E.L.D. now, Rick Jones is, and maybe we will see that in later volumes of Sam Wilson or in some of the volumes of the Steve Rogers series that Nick Spencer will be writing. But anyway, I do like the argument that we've got going on between Sam and Steve. It feels very genuine with the way that Sam was written here. Even though Sam is written very differently by Nick Spencer than he was by Rick Remender, I still feel like the character feels more or less pretty consistent throughout all these books that I read, and I feel like his behavior here feels very consistent with what he would be doing. It's not these things where, like, suddenly this character believes in a certain thing and is willing to fight their lifelong ally over this certain thing. It doesn't feel like that. It feels very natural and organic, and that's one of the first times that I've ever seen that in a story where these two characters will go butt heads with each other. But anyway, the Pleasant Hill storyline is a little bit of a slog at times. It kind of drags in some places, but ultimately, it's very interesting reading this, knowing what was coming later on in Nick Spencer's run. We know that eventually, at the first issue, I think, of Nick Spencer's Steve Rogers run, we know that he's revealed to be an agent of Hydra, and so it's very interesting getting to see some of that being set up here. The Red Skull is at Pleasant Hill, and I'm guessing most people didn't even know that he was there, not even Zemo and all these other supervillains who were imprisoned there, because the Red Skull still has not Captain America, he has Professor Xavier's brain implanted in his own head, and that was something that was set up in Rick Remender's Uncanny Avengers run, and I was kind of happy to see that that's not something they're just ignoring, that he does still have telepathy, and he was using that to kind of influence some of the stuff that was going on. At one point, Zemo sends the Red Skull, who's in disguise, to escort Captain America and Mariah Hill away from all the other hostages, and then Red Skull allows them to escape because it's all part of his plan, and then later Zemo is saying, like, I don't remember why I did that. That doesn't seem like something I would do. It's because Red Skull is using his telepathy to manipulate everything. That was really cool, and ultimately, I'm really excited to read the rest of Nick Spencer's run. I have heard a lot of bad things about Secret Empire, which was actually a separate event that was also written by Nick Spencer, and I may probably read Secret Empire someday. I have said before, like, I'm never going to read Avengers vs. X-Men, and then I found it cheap for like, $3, so I bought the whole thing. So I'm not going to say I will never read Secret Empire. I would like to read it just to see what all the fuss is about. Pretty much everyone said that it was bad. I don't think I heard anyone say that story was good. So I don't doubt that it's bad, but I do want to see how bad it is, and I want to see just what everyone was yelling about. I know what a lot of people were yelling about, but I really want to see for myself. But I do want to read the rest of Nick Spencer's Captain America run that is not the main event of Secret Empire. I want to read the Sam Wilson stuff. I want to read the Steve Rogers stuff. I know that Sam Wilson Volume 3 is a tie-in to Civil War 2, and it's a little weird. In some of these books, Misty Knight is kind of pretty heavily flirting with Sam, and she, they kind of have this will they, won't they thing, but then separately, in some other books, Sam was in a relationship with Carol Danvers, and I know that that's kind of put to the test in Civil War 2, and so, no, I'm sorry. Wow, I just made a huge mistake. War Machine is in a relationship with Carol Danvers, not Sam Wilson. Wow, I apologize. I just caught myself mid-thought thinking that I was right and I was way off base. Anyway, Sam Wilson has a relationship kind of sort of with Misty Knight, not Carol Danvers. I apologize. Anyway, that's about all that I have to say about all these Captain America books that I read. You can actually probably see them right there. All those books with the white spines, those are all the Captain America books I read this week. I pretty much enjoyed all these. The only one that I was kind of sort of on the fence about, well, Fear Him had some issues with that in context with everything else that had been going on in that run, and also the Hail Hydra miniseries. Didn't really like the way we ended that run and then sent off Ian never to see him again. And for that matter, Jet also. You know what would be really cool? Since Jet and Sam Wilson had sex like the day before she went and joined her father and went back to Dimension Z, it'd be really awesome if we could bring her back and she could say, hey, Sam, you have a son and he's a bad guy. It'd kind of be like the anti-version of Ian. I think that'd be really cool. But anyway, they're probably never going to do that because everyone is just pretending like Jet and Ian don't exist. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Rick Remender's run on Captain America and the first 2 volumes of Nick Spencer's run on Sam Wilson. I liked it. I am going to be reading more of this run, and I may talk about them in the future. So in the meantime, I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be back later in the week with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.